Well, there is something going on out in Queens, and it's the U.S. Tennis Open. And who's our first guest, Corey?
Our first
and how
guest,
did you come about knowing this guy?
This is Steve Turner. He's a former ATP tennis touring professional in the 1970s. And I met Steven almost, serendipitously. Sometimes I'll meet these people just randomly walking in the city. And I was walking in Central Park, and it was during this 2-week period when the city, I forget the name of the foundation, I should know it, but they put out pianos all over the city for people to play for a couple of weeks, you know. Yeah. And I see this fella with long dreadlocks and a long beard playing piano, and he's playing very interesting tunes, and it turns out they were his own compositions. He's got 1 million of them. And I went over and I play a little bit myself, and we traded some songs and we traded some thoughts, and then he started talking about his previous career. He's a student of the Kabbalah. He's a Kabbalist, and also he's a former tennis pro. And so then I kept his contact, and I said, listen, when the U.S. Open comes around in a couple of months, I'm going to get in touch with you. And because he started telling me about the way he practices, he hits a ball against the wall. He lives on the Upper East Side, and he's got a very interesting approach to tennis. So we reconnected a couple of weeks ago as the U.S. Open, which is now going on in Flushing Meadow, Corona Park in Queens. And I wrote him up for the Times a week ago Sunday for his very interesting approach to tennis, and I'll let him to start talking about it. But Steve, thanks for being with us this morning.
Well, thank you, Corey.
Yeah. So I guess you could explain it better than I could, but I guess I would summarize it as saying that after your career, which was, you were no slouch as a tennis pro. I mean, you were in the top 100 in the world at one point, and you played some of the greats of the game: Rod Laver, Stan Smith, Ilie Nastase, and others.
Right.
But after a 7-odd year career, you retired around age 30, and you began teaching, and you began other, research and your own, pursuing your own interests, including studying the Kabbalah and the Torah and the Talmud and these other texts. And but you did continue to teach a number of students, right? And your approach to tennis was really intriguing, because I felt that, you lost to some of the greats of the game, as many people. I mean, you were privileged enough to even get on the court with them, but you took a lot away from defeat in your career. And so talk a little bit about that, and also about, what's going on now at the Open, what you see when you watch these matches. I gather a lot of our listeners are following some of the tennis, and the score, and it's a game that's it's full of statistics and first service percentages and all this, and you look kind of beyond that, and you look at a lot of the energy and the momentum of these players, and what you call the will to lose, two people getting out on the court, and we always talk about success and the drive to win, but you always say, and you've told me that there's a equally, if not stronger, force at work in athletes, which is the desire to lose and to self-destruct and to screw up and to go home, and losing in a way can be easier than winning and stepping onto a podium and becoming famous and all the things, the trappings that go with success,
Corey, I enjoyed listening to you say that. You understand exactly what I'm trying to say so well. A minute ago when I turned on the show, as I'm waiting here to speak, I heard the first words I heard were about death from your partner there.
Yeah.
He was singing a tune about death. And so basically that's what I talk about, because I talk about the death instinct. And the death instinct is represented by the will to lose. Everybody, especially in the West here, and in the positive thinking, motivational speaking society, talks about the will to win. Everybody has to be a winner. And, this makes a great, there's a lot of money being made in that, because everybody is basically a loser. And so they're trying to become
At least winners. Donald Trump would have you believe, right?
I'm sorry?
At least Trump.
No, they believe
Trump's
that you're a loser. It's the exact opposite.
Right.
To really be a winner, you have to get in touch with this aspect of the will to lose. Once you, let's talk about it through tennis. There are 128 people in the draw in each of the divisions. So there's 128 men and there's 128 women. And only one person wins at the end of the week. So every week like this, every tournament like this, there's going to be 127 people who lose.
Everybody loses, yeah, except for one person.
Everybody loses. Now, they lose. Does that make them a loser? The first round loser at this tournament makes $42,000.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good.
Losing
check.
some. Yeah. Right.
He's losing. He's a loser, and he makes $42,000.
Right.
If he wins one match, he makes $75,000. Now, so the people who just played last night and made $250,000, and both of those matches last night, the men's and the women's matches, ended in defaults. One hurt her leg and ended 6-love, 6-2.
So they were quitters and losers.
And the other one ended in a default.
Right.
So, again, that's loss.
Yeah.
How to handle loss is the great winner. How to handle death in society. How to handle accidents and things like that. So one has to understand the death instinct in society, and that's what Sigmund Freud wrote about. And quite frankly, Corey, it's not really promoted in America what he really wrote about, because there's more money to be made in promoting theoretically that everybody's a winner and everybody should the will to life and things like that.
Right. I mean, that's all you hear about, not only in sports but in life. You see, if you go into the bookstores or wherever, there's mountains of books on winning and how to and when you talk about sports psychology, forget it. I mean, these athletes, all you hear out of them sometimes is like, oh, I got to put these negative thoughts out of my head. And it's the opposite of what you're saying. And I just,
Yes.
I just want to make it clear to listeners that you're not promoting a book here. You're not. You've just kind of had this theory that they had in your head, and just to back up, I mean, I didn't fully explain. You're a New York City kid. I mean, you're kind of an unlikely kid to become a tennis pro. I mean, you grew up in the village, and
Correct.
You demonstrated an affinity for the game at a young age, and you started playing, and you played with older kids. So your first, you played with kids with three years older than you. So you started losing from the very beginning, but then you started winning, and you were a star in high school and college and the junior levels, and then you're not a loser. You went to some of the highest levels of the game. You played some of the legends of the game, but you also had an interesting, right? I mean, you were Jewish in the tennis world. You spoke of that being something that you had to deal with. So,
it's not a Jewish world. It's not a Jewish world. That's why people should have a great respect for the Williams sisters. And the real genius in the Williams sisters is the person who, again, the normative society has overlooked. The real genius there is the father, who I don't know how many of your listeners know this, that the father kept the Williams girls out of all tournaments until they were ready to win. In other words, there was no developmental period for them. They played in their own court in Compton, California, until they were ready to come out and dominate the world. Because it's the developmental period, the going week to week to different tournaments, staying in people's homes, practicing at at country clubs and things like that. It would have been so difficult for black girls to do it. So the genius here was that he kept them out until they won. Yep. You see? Right. And so people don't realize that. That's a great thing. Now for me, I don't have the skills of a number one player. I was very happy to be 105 in the world at my prime. But just remember that I was a participant in all these events. So I played at the U.S. Open here 5 times. Yep. And so the point is, being a participant, and this gets into my Kabbalah and Jewish philosophy and philosophy of life in general. Being a participant in life itself is enough. That's the winner. You have 80 years, 70 years of life. What happens to you each day doesn't matter. You win, you lose, you have a stomach ache. It doesn't matter. Being in life itself is the beauty. Yeah. And that's why many religions, all religions, don't believe in abortion, because the beauty of everything is in life. And so I'm a winner by being born. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
So what happens to me in a daily encounter, if I lose a tennis match, I had the experience of playing, Rod Laver at the U.S. Open. I actually did play him in doubles at the U.S. Open.
Yeah.
So here's
And you played
one of the
Stan
greatest.
Smith's, and you were wearing Stan Smith
lost.
sneakers, right? Yeah.
Me personally, I didn't care if I won or lost because I was a theoretical tennis player. I'm interested in developing myself, you see, understanding myself, looking over at the other person like Rod Laver and having read all his articles in the newspapers, all the praise that they say, his booming serve, his slashing volleys. So how could I, as a reader of that, step on a court and overcome that, or even be aware of that type of things going on in my body and emotions? And so I had the great experience of being confronted with those emotions at a young age. And so that's what makes me, and myself, I consider myself a winner. I don't even consider myself winning or losing. That's a dichotomy. I don't think of myself when I get up, am I going to win or am I going to lose? I'm going to experience at the moment. And even this, Corey, since I knew I was going to be on today, I was thinking earlier this morning what I was going to say. And quite frankly, what I was going to say 2 hours ago isn't appropriate for now.
Yeah.
The world changes. The sun comes up at a different angle. The world changes every moment.
Yeah.
And so I don't hold on to the past, and I don't project to the future. And so these words I'm telling you now are appropriate for right now. If you call me back tomorrow, I'll have different words to express the same general idea. Does that make sense a little bit?
Yeah, it does. Now, tell me something now. Were you hitting, did you hit today, the hit this morning?
I went out there today.
Well,
yes.
Talk about what you do every morning. You can, if you want to see Steven Turner play tennis, you can turn up on, East 67th Street. There's a playground. He hits the ball against the wall for
St. Catherine's Park on East 67th Street.
And this is solitary tennis, right? You're playing yourself. You're hitting against the wall for hours.
Against myself, because if you really want to know, Corey, whenever I used to play, including Rod Laver, I'm really playing myself. I'm really playing my own emotions, my own reactions and thoughts that are going through my mind. So that's why this stuff about blocking out negative thoughts is the most ridiculous thing for psychological stuff. And I see all these interviews, and they say, well, I try to stay positive. I block out my negative thoughts. I mean, it's like ridiculous. You go with your thoughts.
Yeah.
First of all, there's no such thing as a negative thought. It's a thought. This dichotomy of yes and no, you see, puts a valence on positive as being better than negative. You see, and this brings me in, this is a nice segue musically, brings me into my thing, my development, my real thing, is that I believe that there's going to be eventually 2 forehand tennis. In our society, we don't use the left hand. I grew up, I'm 69 years old, I grew up hitting a one-handed backhand. Now, the greatest innovation in the past 20 years, 30 years, has been everybody now uses a two-handed backhand, except maybe Federer. But even some of the others, they can't compete at this level with a one-handed backhand. So they use a two-handed backhand. Two-handed backhand is a great innovation, and everybody plays great with it. But now, and this is what I always say, how am I, as a 5'10" guy from New York, who doesn't have great access to things, courts, because every court's $100 an hour in the winter, how am I going to overcome somebody who's playing with two hands? How am I going to beat Djokovic? And that's where I need innovation, you see. Innovation is the key. And the innovation is in the body. Everybody has a good forehand, and everybody has a bad backhand. So I said, eliminate the backhands. Hit two forehands. A right-hand forehand, and then a very simple, natural switch into the left hand and hit a left-handed forehand. And the saving of time and space on the court makes me as fast as a faster player. And so that's where this whole thing comes in. And as you can tell from my voice, even though I'm 69 years old, I've been teaching for 35 years. I played, until 31 myself. You can see the enthusiasm in my voice because I think that this is the innovation of the future. And innovation in the person to make the person more complete. Because I believe that tennis is a spiritual pursuit. And that's why I go out there at 7 o'clock in the morning. Other people go to pray at 7 o'clock in the morning. I go out there and pray. There's the man who comes out there to lift weights, also at the park there. He does things on the bars, push-ups, and things like that. He calls that his place of worship. Now, for me, when I go out against the wall there, that wall to me is no different than the wall in Jerusalem, the Wailing Wall, the wall of the temple. Yeah. And what that symbolizes of me hitting up against the wall is the temple wall. And so I make a joke. I have a joke that, one day I'm going to go and play against all the walls in the world, the Great Wall of China, the Berlin Wall, the Trump Wall that he's going to build in Mexico. Right. Yep. Because what the walls represent, you see, they represent actually, this is an interesting thing I didn't think about, until the moment here. That wall that they want to build in Mexico, say, represents the same thing. It represents the divine feminine. And now I'm getting a little technical here, but in Freud, and this is what they overlook here in the West, in Freud, there's in his book, anyway, he talks about the Fort Da complex, you see? And there's a child who throws out an object on a string and it comes back, throws it out on a string and comes back. And that's what I do against the wall. It's the repetition compulsion. Yeah. What I do against the wall is the repetition compulsion. Steve. And in that repetition compulsion is the secret of the death instinct. That's the secret of the death instinct.
Let me ask you just a couple little things. We only got a couple minutes left. What is your take on when you're watching the Open this year? Or did anything occur? I mean, you talk about people, I guess I say beating themselves or losing on, two people stepping out on the court. You talk about unforced errors. There's a lot of mistakes in tennis, and you can see players implode. You can see them beating themselves. Have you been seeing that this Open? I mean, what is your take on some of this stuff? Or do you see it every time you watch? Every match you watch?
Every match. I saw it last night when Tsonga defaulted in the beginning of the third set. Yeah. He couldn't take it psychologically that he couldn't play. Let me say, though, that the structure of the tournament breeds this. It's 3 out of 5 sets. Now, there's this Frenchman who beat Nadal, Pouilly. He had to play, he played 4 5-set matches. A 5-set match is like running a marathon. So for most people, they know the story about running a marathon. How many marathons can you run in a year? 1, 2? You understand? So you can't run a marathon, then wait 48 hours and run another marathon against Nadal. You know what I'm saying? Maybe he can run a marathon against me. But you can't run a marathon against, I can't run a 100-yard dash against, Usain Bolt. Yeah. So the point is that the structure itself in that tournament is using up the players. That's why you're seeing so many injuries and defaults. Yeah. They're using up the players because they're not interested in the players. They're interested in selling those expensive tickets. It's an event. It's a theatrical event. There's $10 beers, $8 Frankfurters, $300 tickets. In that event, they're not interested in even the good matches. And the weird thing was, Corey, there was no matches last night. Let your listeners read the paper. There were no matches. One match, the girl got hurt in the second game and continued on, so she lost 6-love, 6-2. Then they go to the Djokovic match. It was lousy tennis because the guy was pretending he was hurt, and he defaulted in the third set anyway. So there was no tennis for the people who paid these $300 tickets. And so that's the interesting thing about the whole thing. And that's why the whole event has a lot to talk about, including the death instinct and how the players relate into an event like that when they're treated so miserably. They're treated like slaves, and they're well paid, just like the wage slave of today in our society. They're well paid, but they're still slaves.
All right. So with that, Steve, I appreciate your interesting take on the U.S. Open and tennis in general. And if we had more time, I would have got you into the more spirituality topics. But I think that's a conversation for another day. I think that would take.
Well, that's beautiful, and I look forward to it. And so, thank you very much for calling, Corey. I appreciate it.
All right.
And great. I'm certainly stimulated for the rest of the day.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Yeah.